thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me at this conference. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. And I've been following several talks over the last day and today, and I'll have to say, I mean, this is brilliantly organized, and it's hard to follow all of these great speakers who talked about, a lot of absolutely relevant and brilliant issues that I think we all care about. I've been in the preparation for this conference thinking about what I should talk about, and part of me is sort of a technologist, and I wanted to, until a day before the presentation, talk about actually a more machine learning technology related topic that I'm very interested in. But then I sort of decided to switch a little bit because in my main job today, I work in a large university system in Germany. And I'm working with a lot of my friends from my days in Kenya, which are now already 2 years ago when I moved back to Germany, on trying to think about how we change the education system, how we offer high quality education at scale, to train not just ML practitioners, but also sort of critical technology skills on the continent at the fastest pace and at the most scalable way possible. And I thought this might be of great interest here as well, given that we've also heard already a few country perspectives, like from Tunisia and some other countries, in terms of how that's going, specifically also with the support of a lot of good companies. But I want to take a slightly different perspective on this. For me, the main perspective is always that what we typically see in the history of the last, especially when we had major technology changes, is that technological change increases the returns of higher tertiary education, right? So make a bachelor's degree or something like this. And but creating economic opportunity cannot merely be solved by putting more people through higher education, right? So if you assume that the returns, so in terms of both for society as well as for jobs, for you personally, will increase, your chances to get a good job will increase with higher education, then the answer cannot just be to put a lot of people through higher education, as I will just show you in a little bit. And I believe that we need a new model of education to bridge supply and demand side. And I will give you an example of how I think and how I would like to experiment going forward, how this works. And the reason, and I apologize here, I noticed that I have some formatting issues on my slide that I didn't notice earlier. So let's not focus too much on my slides. They're not very pretty anyway. I'll talk over it. In principle, one of the really interesting things that we see is that that technology change drives, in principle, higher returns for tertiary education. If you leave high school and you go to a bachelor's, in most parts of the world, you will have a much better chance of being employed than if you stop after high school or if you don't have any education at all. And you can see this on the right chart if you, for example, look at the world. And what this measures is the need rate, and the need rate stands for, you're looking at all the adults that between a certain age group, here I've chosen 25 to 29, that are neither in education, employment, or training. The reason why this is a good measure is because across Africa, 76% of employment is actually in the informal sector, or 60% without agriculture, which means that when you look at unemployment rates, they actually look pretty low, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. But the reason is that a lot of people, even with tertiary degrees, end up in the informal sector, but in that case, only about 25%. So there's something really interesting here. So if you look at this chart, what you will see, for example, for the world, if you have no education whatsoever, chances are with a little bit more than 40% that you're going to be in the sector that is neither employed nor in education nor in training. But if you have tertiary education, which is then on the yellow bar and on the world average, then your chances are actually very high that you will be in employment or have a job that pays a salary. And that of course also includes entrepreneurs who pay themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at, for example, where you see dramatic shifts is when you look at Eastern Europe and Central and Western Asia, right, where without any education, you're most likely going to be unemployed. With tertiary education, that rate drops dramatically. You see the same pattern in the Arab states and Northern Africa, but the rate for secondary, even at tertiary education, so higher education, are actually still pretty high, which means chances are still that you're going to be in this need state. Even with a bachelor's degree, which is a little terrifying. But sub-Saharan Africa shows a little bit of a weird statistic, which basically is that it almost doesn't make a difference, right? Whether you have an education or not. And that is, and that's kind of brought me, that when I saw the statistics, that kind of brought me to think, like, if there is not so much of a value of a tertiary education, why would you invest all that time and effort, for example, to get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, right? So what really happens, I think, is that we have the supply side, the university and training educational institutions. We have the matching side, which matches people with jobs, and you have the demand side, so typically the employers. And what I want to talk about is what are some of the issues from supply side to demand side, because you can't really resolve especially with the new technologies that are coming up, you can't resolve that issue in Africa by just saying, well, the universities are not doing their job or the employers are not doing their job. It's a little bit more, it's a little bit more tricky. And what you will have to remember is that what happens, especially in sub-Saharan Africa right now, is that graduates who can afford to wait will wait until the right job opens up, and graduates who cannot work will work in informal employment, either in the formal or informal sector. So for example, unpaid internships and all that kind of stuff. And that sort of creates this vacuum where it almost feels like there are no returns in sort of higher education and tertiary degrees. But let's look at the problem of education in Africa. In general, this is true globally, is that the traditional education system and I'm only going to speak about higher education, not about, K-12 or, sort of primary and secondary education. But for higher education, it's traditionally universities, which are also free, but brick and mortar universities in the traditional way as we know them are not scalable because they're expensive. In Germany, for example, where everything and education is free, we spend about 10,000 euros per student per year on average across all the studies. So if you study medicine, it's somewhere around 33,000 euros. If you study humanities, it's somewhere around 6,000 euros. If you study computer science, it's somewhere around 10 to 11,000 euros that the German government spends per student per year to get them through this. That means that the regulatory the funding frameworks are limited, and it's the same in Africa. My estimates are it costs about $5,000 per student on average to support somebody through a free public education system. And that's a lot of money for any country. Regulatory constraints, now that I work inside of the university system here in Germany, they make it very hard to quickly adapt to pressing market demands. And in developing economies, I've seen this, when I worked in India, I've seen this in China, in over the last 20 years. It takes a long time to build up proper academic skills that are worthy teachers and professors. Not that we don't have any, that's not what I'm saying, but developing good teaching skills, especially outside of the prime universities in tier 2 and tier 3 schools, takes a long time, especially in the technology related fields, because you usually get better paying jobs in industry. Simple as that, right? But then if you think about it, on the education side, and sorry, I forgot to switch the slides here. On the education side, you also need to remember that education is a public good. And as a public good, as I said, it's very expensive, right? When you now look at the major technology changes are coming from digital technologies, governments in Africa are often not even prepared to deal with digital technologies themselves. And thereby, there is not the same level of appreciation, for example, to say, well, why don't we create virtual schooling that reaches more people, that trains people in specific segments better, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the same time, in the enterprises, because we also need to ask ourselves the question. I've worked in, for example, in a very well-known local Kenyan company, and what is amazing, of course, is that Africa consists of many growth countries, growth markets, right? And in growth markets, you will always see that people will put a lot of time and effort into selling what's on the truck, selling existing products, and technology change is sort of on the horizon, but they will put more investment and more effort into maintaining high double-digit growth, because that's why they're growth markets. And then in reality, and I've seen this many a times as well, is the whole value proposition for data and AI is foggy. We see this at this conference, and whenever we talk about AI, a lot of what we do in artificial intelligence and machine learning is on the horizon. But if you ask somebody, okay, give me something that I can use to make money, which a lot of industry segments will ask, then it's going to be hard to argue what exactly is it. Give me something that can cut costs, sure, but growth markets don't really care about cutting costs, right? So you see there is no incentive oftentimes for industries in many African countries to actually train their own skills, right? To bring in new people and take a risk on them and work with the education system to develop degree programs and develop also some new ways of thinking. Let me switch to the next. Let me actually restart this thing here. I think it's okay. Okay. So I think that there's one chart that I wanted to go through. Here's just an overview of some of the critical technologies that I see. And it's not just machine learning, right? Cloud computing, I think, is going to be a very powerful platform that I think will drive more of the economic integration that we see, that we've seen many African countries and the various different regions working on. I think cloud computing is going to be a tremendous enabler and also a very, very significant job creator. The low to no code movement, I think, is going to disrupt a lot of what we know of the traditional software development industry, and will push skills up to design and solutioning skills that are also not abundant in Africa. And then similarly, on the data science side, I think, I've seen, for me, the most important part here is that a lot of people do not really have the basic data science skills, even in marketing and sales divisions, where these are actually very, very important. And there is a huge demand, but the skills are not on the market. And then, of course, machine learning, the critical notion here is that, the more applicable machine learning will be for the businesses, right? The lesser skills we will have because the university system is not producing them fast enough. And at the same time, when we have machine learning systems, we also need to operate them the same way as, we've had solar cells for a long time, but it took a long time in Africa to develop, for schools to develop and technical schools and vocational schools to actually develop skills to actually end up maintaining those. Right? So these are the critical drivers from a technology stance where each of them develop, you need to develop skills in each of these areas, and that requires significant training, which is why I'm also an advocate of the role of universities. We hear a lot about, the devaluation of degrees and all that. For me, it's not so much about the degree that you get, but it's what you learn along the way that makes it really important, because you learn how to learn. You learn sort of more things about what you need to learn, but at some point that will be important because you're learning a paradigm, you're learning how to think about technology, and that a degree program just gives you enough time to do that. Plus, you can also work in other countries that will accept your degrees. Those are really important things. And 3 years, for example, for a bachelor's degree is actually not that much when you think about to really put something into production, how long it actually takes, how much knowledge it takes to do something like this, and how much benefits you get if you know more than what is required for a specific job. Now, having said that, and I wanna just skip over a few slides so that I can stop in about 3 minutes. Online education for me is simply the delivery of pedagogy at internet scale. And pedagogy is an approach to teaching, and the key questions that I think as a society we need to ask ourselves are which pedagogy will work in Africa. And I see sort of 3 design parameters here. The first one is to provide an online environment so that students can structure their learning processes in a problem-oriented and self-organized manner. The second design point for me is that I strongly believe that knowledge and competencies in any of these technical fields cannot be imparted. You cannot force feed them to the learners. You need to create a learning environment online where self-learning can occur. And the third one is to develop degree programs. And that's probably the most revolutionary idea that I'm in the process of starting to experiment with in Africa, is that you learn the skills in such a way that as you go through your degree program, you can start working at, let's say, after the first or second semester. That requires a little bit of rethinking, almost like a model of dual studies, where you work and study at the same time, but both influences each other. Online, those things can be done at marginal costs that I can assure you are absolutely remarkable. We have implemented at IU International University, we're one of the largest universities in Germany. We're a university of applied science, so we focus a lot about job skill training. We're state accredited, which means you can get a bachelor's in science degree for about 350 degree programs that we offer, but 50% or I think 80% of our students are in a distance learning mode where we've implemented over many years exactly these 3 design paradigms, right? And it changes people's lives. And at the same time, we have a lot of students who actually work and who study in parallel, where we coordinate with the employers and say, look, this is what they're going to study. Let's do projects together, right? Let's give the students a way to apply their thinking as they are studying into something that is meaningful to you. And as I said, we do this both in synchronized offerings as well as asynchronous offerings, which means, we provide lectures, we provide learning sprints and all that, which I think is an absolute critical thing. Just watching videos is not going to help you create a learning environment that is conducive to active and sort of incentive-driven learning. You have to interact with a teacher, whether you like it or not. You have to interact not just with the teacher, but I also think that, and this is another experiment that we're going to embark on very soon, is you have to, for example, think about machine learning, right? It is, look, I mean, it sounds easier to learn than it is because there's such an abundance of resources and efforts put in by really good companies, right? But at the end of the day, anyone who's ever done it, and I have too for many years, it is very hard. It's really hard to do this well. And what helps you is you work with others. Right. And so what we are trying to create is an environment where people can actually, as they learn, help each other out to get better at what they do, because I think that's a multiplication of the outcome rather than a distraction. So on our online platform, what we are going to try is to bring all of these things together. And I'm going to skip here. I have an example of a curriculum that I want to implement now with some partners across a variety of countries in Africa, specifically for a bachelor's degree in, believe it or not, artificial intelligence. And the idea is that after the first 2 semesters, we will connect them with a bunch of partners who are actually partially paying for this at a cost that you cannot beat. I'm not going to say the numbers, but think of it as university education that's in the order of, anything between $50 to $80 a month, and where industry partners can engage. Where my goal is that industry partners will say, "Hey, I have these issues, these opportunities with AI. Help me to build them up." While you are studying, we're creating a company there to help us with the actual outsourcing of these skills and the matchmaking, because we can't wait for governments to actually do this. So this is a completely new model, I think, of teaching, and there are many different employees. I have, as I said, I think degrees are important, which is why I am a strong advocate of it. Typically, you hear a lot of people just like me who have, tons of degrees and work with elite schools to say, it's actually not that important. That's not true. It's not important maybe for your first job, but it absolutely is for your second job, because a degree is a way for you to build up a history about who you are, what you have learned. I'm already way out of time, but so let me just bring out one last slide, which is, I believe that community-based learning, also in integration with industry, is going to be a game changer that requires a movement, right? It requires not just to do this in Kenya or Nigeria or Ghana or some places that we like to go, but it requires a movement across the continent, and online enables that. 100K ML practitioners is probably too little. I should have said 1 million, because we need 1 million technical skills, given the pace of technological change and the opportunity, because the competition, of course, is there. Google and Facebook and everyone can work in Africa today, and AWS and whoever, they can be, global companies can be local competition. And I think it's absolutely important for many African countries to step up and build out their own skill space, and also outsource some, use it, just like India did 20 years ago. Let me stop here and thank you again, and open this up for a few questions in the last minute and a half.
Thank you very much, Kamal. That was a very intriguing talk. And I have a couple of questions regarding, so this question has already been asked before in AMLD Africa conference yesterday, and is, how can we retain the African talent that leave for better paying jobs, for better opportunities abroad? How can we retain them in Africa so that the students who are gonna learn from these talents have better opportunities?
So there's a twofold answer to this. This is a very good question. The first answer, of course, is you have to create, you have to have more better jobs on the continent that will create more incentives to stay back. Right? You've seen this in China, you've seen this in India, that the more companies that actually provide jobs on the continent, they also attract the same kind of people that would other go. On the other hand, I would not, right now the brain drain, I think the data will show it, the brain drain is terrible. Right now, the continent is getting ravaged. However, people will also come back. I've seen this in India when I was working there. I brought back a lot of people, highly talented people. So it needs to be a mix and match. We're probably in a phase where the brain drain is a little bit too hard, but for that, we need to create opportunities on the country, high quality jobs, and get moving with that.
Agreed. Most of the people, at least I know, have like they left because they found better opportunities, right? And we need to
Absolutely.
create these better opportunities in Africa itself to retain these talents.